Mac, and Mosher here on Birds 365. John McMullen, Jody McDonald, Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds, both .com, their outstanding website, and the podcast that he and his buddies put together on a week-in, week-out basis. Good to see you, Mosher. Love the backdrop. No hat needed there because he's got the great backdrop.
Got hair too.
He's got hair too, which
yeah, we're I mean, I'm not you guys, but I'm my heydays are behind me.
Hopefully we're doing this long enough so that we've got three guys with not much left on top doing it together. All right, here's where I want to go first because we were just debating this back and forth. Adjustments. John loves to tell the story of, while you're peeing, that's why you're making halftime adjustments. Not halftime, in-game adjustments. I thought the week before I was singing the praises of Sean Desai going, he did things differently against Miami. He'd get up and pressure Waddle a little bit and play with a corner right in his face. Not every single play because that's just not the Eagle defense. But once in a while, he never did it against the Commanders this past week. I thought he made the adjustment and it worked in game or halftime or whenever the hell he made it before the game started against Miami and made none last week against the Commanders. You have faith that Sean Desai, if adjustments pre-game, in-game, halftime, last possession are needed, he's the guy to push the right buttons at the right time?
Well, first of all, I'm going to slightly disagree with you a little bit.
Okay, good,
I'm not going to pretend to be the expert here. I got this from our great podcast done by Quentin Michael and Jason Avant called the Q&A podcast on Inside the Birds. And what they did notice, especially in the third quarter going into the fourth quarter, was that the pass rush started executing a different style of stunt, which Washington really struggles with stunts. They did it last week against the Giants too. That enabled the Eagles to get more pressure. And if you do look starting midway through the third and into the fourth quarter, Hassan Reddick had the huge sack there. They were able to generate more pressure on Sam Howell in the last, say, 12 to 15 minutes of the game than they were for the start. Now, that's an adjustment to what Washington doing, right? Washington's running so much quick game, and I don't know that anybody saw that amount of quick game coming. And then not just quick game, but when they were taking their best playmakers and putting them on the inside instead of the outside, and then trying to run quick game off the middle of the Eagles defense. So it's hard to get sacks when the ball is going to come out that quickly. But if you can confuse the offensive line and get some hands in the quarterback's face, which is what Jason and Quentin noticed they started doing more in the third, fourth quarter, then you can sort of neutralize what you're seeing from that quick game. So I felt like that was an adjustment that I myself didn't notice at all watching the game, Jody, but I did notice that there was more pressure in the fourth quarter, and that was something schematically there. So I do have faith that Sean Desai, listen, that having faith in them going out and doing it and winning is two different things. But I feel like I've seen some pretty good third and fourth quarters from the Eagles defense this year. The Rams game is a great example of how they look like terrible for a first quarter, first half. They came out and pitched a shutout. There have been other Miami game really good in the second half too. So, I have faith that they'll have a pretty decent plan in. But at the end of the day, you are definitely as good as your personnel on the back end is. And there are some issues that the Eagles have there, no doubt.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go with you, Geoff, that back end, specifically up the middle of the field. Now, injuries, Doug Peterson used to say this back in the day. I asked him what can derail a season most quickly, and he said multiple injuries at the same position.
Yeah.
Already happened in slot. I mean, going back to the preseason with Zach McPherson, the backup going down. Then it was Avonte Maddox, who's one of the best nickel corners. And now they've used 8 different bodies in there. It's absurd. In one hand, and I was saying this, I respect Sean Desai for trying different things, looking at different pieces. But at some point, you got to make a decision, don't you? And I think we're at that point now that we're by the trade deadline. I think they want it to be Bradley Roby. Now, he's not healthy either, so eventually they'll get there. But even before you get there, don't you have to make a decision now at that particular position?
I do think you do. I think Bradley Roby was that decision. Obviously, he's been hurt, so then they had to get Josiah Scott. I mean, their decisions right now are what body, right, can we put in that position that's played it before? To your point, I feel like especially entering the stretch of games they're about to play, that experimentation time for Sean Desai probably ends. And that would probably mean that you're not going to see Sidney Brown in the slot in big nickel packages like you saw in the first half, or quite a bit against Washington. Just not a slot cornerback.
Are you predicting that for this week? Because John
he's
said
not
he
in the
thinks we're
slot?
going to see a lot of Sidney in the slot this week.
Yeah, I predict that we are not going to see a lot of Sidney Brown matched up against CeeDee Lamb on the inside.
Well, it wouldn't be. I think they're going to piecemeal it like they did last week, Geoff. And
well, I think when Josiah Scott played 2 weeks ago because they needed a slot and some of their, the guys like Sidney Brown were just coming back. I personally feel like you'd want Josiah there in nickel, like traditional nickel, because
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah,
but remember, Sidney started that game at safety. So and then Reed comes back, Kevin Byard's here, so all of a sudden and that was an issue too. And Kevin's going to get better and better in the communication. I think that's going to settle down. So then it was okay, we got to get Sidney on the field. And then they decide to piecemeal it with Sidney Brown and then Eli Ricks in known pass situations. To me, it should probably be, if you're going to piecemeal it, it should probably be Sidney Brown and Josiah Scott. But I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they're probably not going to play a lot of man defense. I think that's
they got to zone this up,
right? And then secondly, I can see Sidney Brown playing, but maybe as a safety and not a nickel. In fact, Byard has played nickel before, so you could have Reed Blankenship and Brown in your two deep coverages, and then put Byard as the nickel. And I forgot about Eli Ricks. I thought he actually played decently, so he might be a better matchup if you have to play man or man concepts within zone, your cloud coverages, your quarter halves with Eli Ricks as your slot defender. I just don't think Sidney Brown is built for it. That's not his game. You want him as a safety coming down into the box, making a tackle, or sideline to sideline. If a receiver catches the ball, you don't really want him in one-on-one situations like we saw. I mean, that's not something he ever did in college. And I know they drafted him
with a third-round pick, but you bring that interesting because he's a third-round. The Eagles call him a Red Star player. One of the few Red Star players. But I'll ask you this, Geoff. They don't want a box safety. Why the hell did they draft Sidney Brown? They want covered safeties. He's more comfortable at the line of scrimmage, and that's why they're thinking, well, let's get him on the field in the slot near the line of scrimmage. And he did a really good job in run support. He made some, you see the athleticism, you see his abilities, but they don't have that player in this defense. That's not what this defense is designed. So why that's a strange fit to me from a draft perspective.
You're right. They do. So they drafted two players this year, right? Who didn't play the positions that they were drafted at, but because they did at the Senior Bowl, the Eagles saw glimpses of it. And the other one being Tyler Steen, who was never a guard, but played guard at the Senior Bowl. So, the draft is a projection. They felt that they saw enough athleticism from Sidney Brown to be able to, and then again, I don't think that they saw him as a slot hybrid nickel. I think they see him as a safety, and eventually he'll be a safety and be put more, especially in Fangio style defenses, he'll be put in situations where he's playing a lot of too high, so he's not patrolling the whole field anyway. I think eventually they'll get him into advantageous points. They're just stuck in a bind right now and trying to see what works in the slot. But also, I would say their track record of drafting corners and safeties isn't fantastic either. So that's something to watch for in the future. And the whole Red Star thing is very, very much a big part of it. I mean, Nakobe Dean, another guy who is considered great leader, captain, smart, has everything you want. But what they're going to ask him to do and what they are asking him to do now is not what he was asked to do in college. In third down, he was getting the quarterback. He was a blitzer.
Yeah.
Third down in this defense, you're taking drops. You're not blitzing if you're a linebacker. You are being asked to either do zone coverages and take deep drops, or maybe every once in a while run with a tight end or an interior receiver. And that's not something he's done.
Yeah.
Jeff, my next question.
Correct.
My next question is about a Red Star player too, and you guys will correct me if he wasn't "quote unquote" considered a Red Star player. And I'm going to quote a Simpsons character. That would be Mr. Burns, who, ironically enough, Jerry Jones kind of reminds me of. One of his famous lines is "Release the hounds." I'm only going singular here. One hound, as in Nolan Smith. Is this the week that Nolan Smith plays? All I'm asking for is 1/3 of the snaps. He doesn't even get close to 1/3 of the snaps. Talk of camp, first round pick, and he's just not getting a chance to prove if he is or isn't a Red Star player. Is this the week they release the hounds and let Nolan Smith go?
Oh, Jody, why do you have to go there?
Sorry, bud.
First of all, I was hoping you were going to quote Ralph Wiggum, but I'll go. Montgomery Burns is good. That's a good one. Listen, like what more do you want from their four? They have 6 pass rushers. Like I don't understand.
It's
what
okay
you
to
think
red
they're going
shirt.
to get better by putting Nolan Smith on the field. He's got to get stronger. You saw him a couple of times.
How many of those outside defensive ends got sacks last? Oh, that's right, 1 in the last 5 minutes of the game.
You can't sack
as
quarterback.
Great as they are, they didn't quite.
So you're
rally up
telling
the
me,
sack
Jody,
list.
you're pulling Hassan Reddick and all that experience and production off the field, or Josh Sweat to maybe see if Nolan Smith can do a better job of it.
He's getting less snaps than Derek Barnett on a weekly basis.
He's a if you compound special teams where he's also playing, he's probably playing more snaps on the field than Derek Barnett.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about from the line of scrimmage.
But he was drafted for the future. He was the second first round pick. He's got 2 All-Pro or 1 All-Pro, and the guy who's not the All-Pro might be the best player.
Yeah, he's the better. He's the better one.
So I don't know what
you could have. Here's what I've been trying. You could have Joe Green. I don't know. Pick who you want. Jack Youngblood, Carl Eller can be in your rotation. Deacon Jones. We'll make that a rotation. They weren't getting sacks last week. Nobody was getting sacks last week. When you get the football out that quickly, nobody's getting sacks. The key is how are you going to adjust to that? And the Eagles, because of their middle of the field issues, Geoff brought up Nakobe Dean. His coverage numbers. And then you have the safeties. Reed Blankenship probably had his worst game of the year coming off the injury, even though he kind of made up for it with the interception. Kevin Byard, look, he's been there for 5 days. He had trouble communicating. It was a disaster in the middle of the field. That's got to get better. Does it get good enough when it ends up with Roby in the slot, Nakobe Dean, Zach Cunningham, Kevin Byard, Reed Blankenship? How good can it be? What is the upside with that group?
I have concerns, John. I mean, this is something we talked about on the podcast. I think the concerns extend to the fact that your outside corners who are supposed to be really good are not playing very good. I mean, the touchdown that James Bradbury gave up against Washington is almost inexcusable for a guy of his pedigree. He's biting on a run fake when you're the furthest outside corner. You are the last person, maybe other than the steep safety, who can make a tackle if the guy actually hands off, right? Your responsibility in that zone right there, I think they were in a cover 1, is to just make sure Terry McLaurin doesn't get behind you, right? And you bite on a run fake and let him get behind you right from the start. That is not just one snap in which James Bradbury has not played well. Now, I give him a little bit of a break because he was also one of the 312 slot corners they've had to play where he's never played that before. So he's had to do a lot this year, but that was his natural position. He hasn't played great. Slay hasn't played great. You add Kevin Byard. He's another guy over 30. Greg Cosell, who does, a show with Clay Harbor for us called Inside the Tape. It dropped today. They both pointed out they're a little concerned overall from outside to inside to linebacker with the lack of overall speed that the Eagles have in their back 7. And I think that manifested against Washington. Now, like, they still have talent, and I don't think every game they're going to get torn apart. But certainly when you look at Dallas and then Buffalo and San Francisco and Kansas City, those are teams that have good quarterbacks, good offensive schemes, can do those bunch formations that give the Eagles all sorts of fits. So they're going to have to be high-scoring games for the Eagles, and they're going to Sean Desai will definitely have to figure out ways to make sure that his pass rush isn't neutralized, because that when the Eagles' pass rush is good, those guys in the back end are good. So he'll have to continue to be creative.
Well, that's why I said the Eagles' best nickel cornerback is their pass rush. That's their best. When it gets home, they're okay. When it doesn't, it's an issue. It's a big issue.
And they don't cause takeaways anymore, guys. This is something that I remember talking to you guys about going into the year.
Yeah.
You know, what's going to be about this Eagles remade defense? And I said, if they don't take the ball away like last year, which I don't think they will, because A, last year was somewhat unsustainable, and B, you actually had a playmaker like CJ Gardner-Johnson, whereas nobody on that back end is known as a guy who's going to take the ball away a whole lot, except for Byard, although that was years ago. So we'll see, because right now they're minus as a team, -3 in turnover ratio. It's hard to win games against good teams that way.
Last coverage question, I promise. If these are the 3 scenarios, tell me which one is most likely to happen for the Eagles in coverage against the Cowboys. You play your zone, you play your zone. You do what you do. You have faith in the team. You're just going to stick to your principles and your players. Injuries, you got to put in whoever you got to put in, but they don't change anything. Number 2, they let Slay travel some with CD Lamb from time to time, depending on game situation and the lineup that the Cowboys come out with. You have faith in the communication. All your D-backs to go Slay, meaning he's taking CD Lamb one-on-one. Or Slay travels every play with CD Lamb, that they just put him against him and go, we're not going to get beat by CD Lamb, and we'll run the rest of our defense around the fact that he's going to play a mano-a-mano. Which one's most likely to happen?
I think Slay is going to stay to his side. I don't think he's going to travel. I think when you travel, what you do is you ask your entire secondary to be more communicative, more out of place. And right now you're just putting too many guys who have not played together enough. Plus, I'm of the mindset that CD's going to get his 10 for 100, because that's how good he is and that's how weak the Eagles are there. My concern going into this game is don't let Cooks beat me. Don't let Tolbert beat me. Don't let who's their other Michael Gallup beat me. Don't let Ferguson beat me too much. If CD gets his 10 for 100, but I shut down everybody else and Tony Pollard doesn't scorch me, I feel like I'm all right.
Yeah, I said the same thing, Geoff, except it's like a Tyreek Hill game. Tyreek had like 11 for 88.
Right.
If it's 10 for 100, it's fine. If it's 10 for 170, then you got an issue. So I think it's about making yards after catch, making that when he does catch it, make sure he's down pretty quickly. I think that is sort of what you have to do with CD Lamb. But he's like an NBA scorer. He's going to get 20. Make them 25, 30s, make them work as hard as possible and limit the damage. It's not like you're going to shut out CD Lamb. It's not going to happen.
His average is 13.8. So if you're giving him 10, that's 138. That's not 100.
Hey, like John said, give him 13 catches, but for 95 yards, 110 yards. Just keep him from going crazy and you're good.
Yeah.
Is their defensive secondary that good at tackling that you can bank on that?
Well, they have been. They did it.
Tackling, yes. I don't think tackling is the issue. Yeah.
They've proven they can do it. Because, as good as CD Lamb is, he's not Tyreek Hill. So they've proven they can do it. But they've also proven they can't do it in spots at times. So, that's the weakness of this team, up the middle on defense. I mentioned Nakobe in coverage. Nakobe, it was weird. He was so great against the run and just a disaster in coverage. I've been asking a bunch of people this, and I want to get your thoughts, Geoff. Nick Morrow's played really well. Really well. Yeah. I get Nakobe's the long term. I get what the Eagles are doing. But this is obviously a legit Super Bowl contender. I would have kept playing Nicholas Morrow until he had a bad game. Then you say, all right, it's coming. You think the shoe's going to drop, but let the shoe drop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, and they tough, pretty much, they pretty much went back to Dean, but they're hedging and rotating a little bit.
Yeah. Which I don't like. Yeah. I don't like rotating linebackers, especially with the green dot and the helmet. I get why they're doing it. Nakobe's the guy in the future and all. But of all the names we haven't mentioned, a personnel source who's been watching Eagles tape told me, you know what? I think the guy who's done the best job in coverage, and maybe this is based on
Zach,
expectation, is Zach Cunningham,
Yeah.
right? So it's basically what the inference would be, keep Cunningham and Morrow on the field because they were actually playing pretty well together when Dean was out. But that puts the organization in a bind, and it sends a bad message about Dean, which may or may not be true. It's been too small of a sample other than that bad Washington game for Nakobe. So they're going with this difficult, rotation, trying to make it work. But like I was just telling you, with these games coming up, I think the time for experimentation is over. Get your two best linebackers on the field and figure it out after, because inevitably somebody will get hurt or someone will have to come out, and you'll be able to get whoever you want back on the field. But it is true that Morrow and Cunningham were doing the best job as a unit, as a tandem when Dean was out.
All right, Moshe, no, you got to run, so we'll finish here. Just fill in the blank, tipping your hand either way. The Eagles will win the game because an aspect of their game, a matchup, blah, blah, blah. The Eagles could lose this game because a matchup you fear, a strength of the Cowboys. Pick or choose whichever one you want.
The Cowboys are still inconsistent, and you can still run on them. So they'll win the game because they run the ball effectively and are able to neutralize Micah Parsons, which they've been able to do in the past. Why they would lose the game would be, I think, because they were not able to generate pressure and gave up too many air yards to guys like Lamb and Brandon Cooks.
That'll be a key aaspect. Make sure you check out all
the
turnovers,
Jody. Turnovers. If they turn the ball over as much as they've been doing,
you think they're a plus on Sunday?
I don't know. No, I'm telling you, if they're a plus, they win. If they're a minus, they lose. There you go.
If they're a plus, they're a lock. But we're not sure of that right now. Jeff, always a pleasure. Thank you much, bud.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
InsideTheBirds.com, Inside the Bird Podcast. Good bud, Jeff Mosher here with us on Birds 365. All right, Johnny Mac. Much like Jeff Mosher, I must take my leave. You're going to finish up. Bill Colarulo is going to jump in tomorrow. They jump in for you for the final hour of the show. He's going to jump in for me for the final 20 minutes of the show. So Bill Colarulo and Johnny Mac coming back next here on Birds 365.